comments. We do have these 4 questions as guides, but we don't have to follow them. I'm sure you all have things you'd like to say or ask based on what you've heard so far today. So the floor is open. Ben, you look like you...
Yeah, pretty exciting stuff. That, building off the last comment is one, how do we get these into the hands of, in my case, local governments that are actually going to use them, right? Knowing that they're limited in capacity and funds, there's all kinds of things that so from where I'm sitting with the provincial government and climate action secretary in particular, I'm sure there's a GHG reduction element to what I'm about to say, but for instance, we do work on behalf of local governments where we push out a GHG inventory for all local governments in BC, community energy emissions inventory, so that's one thing. We also have about 160 local governments who are submitting to us their corporate energy inventories. Right? So we've got their attention, and there's a bit of a channel there in regards to us providing them information and them giving us information. And I'm trying to think a little bit out loud here and just have a little quick chat about this. How do we take one of these tools or elements of these tools and push it out or deliver it along with the inventory? We've got their attention on the inventory. In some cases they use it for their own planning. In other cases they get their carbon tax back for providing it. So there's a bit of a hook there. So as I was listening today, I was trying to figure out which tools or which elements of the tools we could somehow attach or integrate so that they were getting not just the energy use or and the GHG piece, or giving us the corporate energy use, but giving us information that would fill out the fields, I'm assuming, in these tools. It just sort of came to me that it would be a really, again, just in the BC context, but it would be something really powerful if we could provide them that. Certainly there's this obsession with the GHG piece for sure, but I just trying to think, what else can we bring along with that?
So just following up from Adam's last comment, I mean, is your shop in the provincial government a place that could do some of this coordination of collaboration? Collaboration is really hard in the marketplace.
Yes, I know, and I think that certainly it's a bit of maneuvering on my part because we're about GHG reductions and achieving the provincial target. But it's not like it's not more work. With the channel, there's this information moving back and forth, and there's all kinds of variables with that. But there's no reason that we couldn't add more into it. With the community energy emissions inventory, unfortunately she's not here today, Mary Stories are. I'm not sure if she's listening in right now, but we have a supporting indicator element to that. And so we're already, there's a bit of a precedent there in regards to walkability and some other things. So this work could sort of just fit in that. Right? Either we provide the framework to local governments and they fill it in, or we figure out how to do some of it for them.
Okay, somebody else? Yes.
The thought that's going
sorry, just introduce yourself.
Roy Brook from Victoria. So my thought is if the end game then is greater uptake, greater implementation, obviously municipalities are a key core audience, but there's as many municipalities as there are far more individual communities and neighborhoods, and if I think of Victoria, even the small sort of municipal boundaries of Victoria, there's probably 8 or 10 communities with their own community associations within them. And so the question that's in my mind is how to get some of the local innovative or standardized tools out to that group for 2 reasons. One, I think you would just multiply the opportunity for uptake. And also, I think in the context of some municipalities are willing to be what they perceive to be more leading edge, others more reticent, let's say. And I think seeing it demonstrated there on the ground in different local areas within municipalities would, I think, perhaps force the issue. And there may be a possible kind of partnership. I'm thinking of, I don't know about them specifically, but somebody like the BC Real Estate Foundation who has mandate funding things that are related to local land use planning might be a logical partner for such a thing.
Good. Bill?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to make a couple of comments about my general reaction to the whole session this afternoon. and that is the lack of obvious context. None of the presenters said anything about the global framework within which we're operating today. There was one slide, I guess Peter's toward the end, that showed that the world's in a state of overshoot. So right now, there's almost no dispute about this among the scientists who look at the question. We are using energy and resources on the planet depending on which one you look at, 50 to 80% faster than they can be regenerated by the global systems, if they're regeneratable at all, because there are non-renewable resources. So the first context we have to think about is what is the role of cities, which are huge nodes of consumption on a planet which is already in a state of overshoot by 50 to 80%, which projects to add another 40% to the population in the next 30 years, another 3 billion people or so. So even if we were static, the first question one really ought to be asking about a framework for urban sustainability is, does my approach or project result in a 40 to 50% reduction in material and energy throughput compared to comparable developments elsewhere? So if we're not actually creating systems that use less material and energy by that enormous quantity, we're not moving toward the sustainability direction, and we haven't yet taken account of the fact that we're expecting another 3 million people to arrive on the planet, or 3 billion rather. So I think we really have to get serious about what do we mean by sustainability, and so far I've only talked about the biophysical part of it, and I think it's generous of all of these other approaches to include the economic and the cultural and social. Those have to be part of this, but they have to be framed within the biophysical, because I don't care what your economy or your culture looks like, if you don't have air to breathe and water to drink and a planet that functions, it comes to nothing. So there is a prioritization, arguably, among these different criteria, and I think the biophysical is an important one that hasn't really adequately been taken into account in that global framing. What does sustainability mean? If Vancouver, which is, in my view, one of the least sustainable cities on the planet, were the only city on the planet, it would be perfectly sustainable, because it doesn't use a fraction of the total output of the world's assets. But in the present context, it's unsustainable because it's contributing disproportionately to the overshoot phenomenon that we talked about, that I talked about a moment ago. So everything has to be put in context. Globally, sustainability is an absolute, but at the local level, it's relative to the global situation and everything else that's going on. So I guess what I'm really trying to say to all of us in developing these frameworks is to keep in mind that global context and a single question. If every city lived according to the framework I'm putting forward, would we be living within the carrying capacity or biophysical capacity of planet Earth? And if the answer to that is no, then you may be making a contribution, an incremental move, but you're not getting towards sustainability. At least you're not sustainable as yet.
Peter,
So
sorry, and then Harry.
I just speak briefly to that. I appreciate the perspective, Bill, and I think everyone in this room would appreciate that very much. I think the interesting challenge we came up with was we could sit down and take Mark's 6 forms of community capital, and we could break those down into 20 stocks, and we could figure out 70 indicators for the 20 stocks. And then we have to ask ourselves the question, at a neighborhood scale, what does it mean to be sustainable? What does it mean to be seriously unsustainable? So what are the thresholds or targets we're trying to set for ourselves? And boy, I can tell you, that's a head scratcher. And we had to ask ourselves not just, at purely theoretical level, well, what are the numbers we should set? But then we had to ask ourselves, okay, well, is that appropriate in the first world, the third world, are the same in both places or different? And we had to ask ourselves, can we even really technically make that call at a neighborhood scale? So I'd say absolutely, I acknowledge that issue, and I think it applies across the board. And I think it gets harder and harder the further you get from a global scale to put some numbers down that are credible with the range of audiences you need. So yeah, huge challenge.
Harry.
I would like to answer to both of you, gentlemen. Coming from this kind of European background where we focused more, let's say, on one goals and then married all those goals, I have one example. Let's say the energy consumption. When I started with this kind of programs, we were definitely going for low energy houses. Then we went on to passive house standard. And when I'm talking passive house standard, the ideas came in the year 83, 84, and were really realized in the late 90s. In Switzerland, we are not talking passive house standard anymore. I'm serious, we're talking active house standard. We are creating, not even in one building, but even in a bunch of buildings, more than a complete community would need. So that is standard. I'm not talking about goals, that's standard. We are far away here in this part of the world from that. Marry this with social aspects, with economic aspects, and you will realize these kind of systems, if we take them for serious, must not be static. They must be having a learning curve and must be adapted. We thought when we created that only 5 years ago, we have to adapt them every 3 years. We now know we have to adapt them even every 6 months. The learning curve I had was that it is really important not, and that's the answer to your obstacles you have when you're creating something like that. On the first thing you have to look, of course, for the impact globally, but on the other hand, what you can create is first something for the region and or for your kind of neighborhood. And if you set the goals, then you can later adapt them. Really important, what I've learned from that is every 6 months, if the market is reacting, is really short. I'm not capable, none of my colleagues, we are now in our headquarters, we started with 12 people, and just in our headquarters we are around about 100 people now, just organizing this kind of tools. And that's not the guys who volunteer. We have round about 15,000 volunteers. So that means it's a complete community which brings in more ideas and more impact on local governments, any kind of size, than you can imagine. You should not limit yourself by setting up this kind of limitations on time frames. Suddenly the market is reacting quicker with solutions than we could ever imagine. Another example, for example, we integrated the industry in this kind of discussion. And I'm always saying what I'm talking about is building as well as communities. We do not even know what we should describe as a standard. But sometimes the industry reacting on this kind of tools suddenly changes our kind of prerequisites and deliver something which is much better than we could describe. And the very moment we print out something or publish something on internet, the industry is suddenly going into a kind of competition and delivers a standard which is better than we imagined. So, for example, we have a company in Europe which is building this kind of light regulation shades. Whatever we described was on the market for 3 weeks, I'm not exaggerating. And the industry set up a complete new standard simply because they were able to do it. And from that moment on, we stopped it and said, hey, industry, give us the rules. You are much better in this kind of special kind of specs. And seeing that also now with the urban design, the local communities can create, if we give a framework, much more and quicker because they know their customers much better. So that is something I encourage you to be diverse and start out with different systems and let the market decide.
So, very interesting comments. Somebody else? Yes.
James Demands. I think I mentioned this to some of the people I conversed with during the break, but the fear of focusing solely on elements that can be measured relatively easily, and this kind of return to the modernistic planning, with engineers coming up with these very elaborate data-intensive analytics, and that negates input from publics or the flexibility to revisit and come back and rethink or just consider, is this currently applicable? And also the requirement, noting that if 95% of master plans fail to achieve their intended results, the flexibility required from local governments well, the requirement for local governments to be flexible, to start engaging with it, more of a back and forth conversation with the residents, industry, and having how do we value the input from the people participating, that qualitative input, and weigh that against this data-intensive quantitative. That's a big concern I have, and it's kind of, we can maybe take the shortcut to just focus on readily or easily measurable data.
No, it's a good point. It echoes Peter's earlier comment. You know, it's one thing to have, for example, we know we have to, you know, reach certain biophysical targets, but when you're bringing that down to a community and saying, you know, and they have to buy into it, that's where it gets really tough. Adam, Adam wanted to say something. Adam, back?
Yeah, thank you. This is fascinating dialogue, and I've heard a number of these issues before, and there's some new issues that I find very interesting. I just want to make a couple of observations and comments, and I do this wearing a couple of hats. I'm now building my second tool, so I've been a tool builder for about a decade, but I've also been on the sort of the purchase end and the customer side of tools. The first comment I'd say is there's no such thing as a perfect tool. They only do so much. I'll also say that these tools and frameworks are just words on paper, okay? And the key objective is to get people to use them, because the tool is worthless, makes no difference if people don't pick it up and use it. And I've studied why tools don't work, because I've had to build two of them, and I didn't want to go down that path. And sometimes it's not technically what's in the tools, it's how they're framed, it's the language that's used, and it's the value proposition in taking them to market. So I just leave you with sort of the thoughts around, let's not overcomplicate this, let's keep it simple. They're just words on paper. If we want change to happen, which I think we all do, we need to get people starting to use them. They need to be interventions into behaviour. And I think you guys are sitting in one of the best hotbeds of sustainable neighbourhood development in the world. I think that the South East Falls Creek Olympic Village is a classic example of what we want to see more of, in that tools we use to help as an intervention to investments. A city was committed to changing practices, and more importantly, the city learned through the use of a pilot project and is now replicating elsewhere. I think that is one of the very few actual sustainable neighbourhood development projects in the world where a tool has been part of an intervention, investments have been made, there's been learning, and then there's been a commitment to replicate through new citywide policy. And I think that is what we need to spread more of around the world, so that we can learn from it and we can change our practices. So I just want to share some of those thoughts, that's all.
Great, thank you. Other comments from people in the room? I'm going to hold you off for a minute, just because I know you say, well, yes, and just say your name, please.
Just maybe for the district of Vancouver, just, one thing we haven't spoken about yet is sort of linkages between, in the case of say greenhouse gas, between mitigation and adaptation. So often when you're talking about sustainability indicators, that type of thing, people may react to what's in it for them or what will hold in their future. And so I was kind of thinking about often to get more of a, I don't know, an uptake or interest in discussing adaptation versus mitigation, just on that one area. Or if you were looking at a different area, say rainwater management, and you're doing planning work as well, people will often respond more to the reactive sort of flooding issue versus proactive planning. So I know this frame, none of these frameworks, I didn't really hear much about resiliency, but when you're looking at say energy consumption, that type of thing, how will that play out in the future?
Right. So you're making the point, which we all know is true, that
Yeah.
it's a lot easier for people to deal with sort of a crisis now than an impending one.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, somebody else?
So the last speaker,
Sorry,
virtually,
you are?
Graham Silver, Ivanhoe, Cambridge, retail. The last speaker was talking specifically about Southeast Falls Creek, and I would like to get Bill's opinion on whether he believes that community actually takes it as far as it needs to go to take us down this 50% reduction road. What would a community or new community look like if it was actually to achieve this 50% reduction that we need to? Not like Falls Creek, I'm sure.
That was one of the comments I was going to make. We've actually done a very detailed post-occupancy assessment of Southeast Falls Creek. And while it is a shining example of best practices locally, it takes us maybe 15% down compared to other neighborhoods. That's in a general sense. There may be one or two criteria where it does it
So you've
better.
got to go way farther.
But it's, we've got to go very much further. I mean, for one thing, because they saved a little bit here, they thought they could have wall-to-ceiling glass, for example, which pisses heat into the environment as fast as anything else. So yes, we can go a very great deal further. I've got to leave, so I do want to make just one final comment. I think all of us here, in developing these frameworks and working with cities and neighborhoods and so on, in implementing them, have a major educative role. And we need to get people to understand what it is that we're really attempting to do here in a global framework. Almost all of these discussions have focused on buildings or urban design. Almost nothing has been nothing deals with the personal consumption habits of the people occupying these places. So one of the things we've done in some detail is to look at what's the effect of living in a zero energy building if the people save $3,000 a year in heating costs. Well, if they use that to fly to Paris for the weekend twice a year, they've blown any benefit gained from the better construction of their dwelling place. So this has to become a lifestyle issue. And this is a bummer. Nobody wants to talk about their personal consumption habits or reducing their ecological footprint, to use my kind of language. But frankly, we cannot avoid talking about those things and moving forward incrementally. Reducing a footprint doesn't mean you have to live like some, peasant that you don't even want to talk about. We waste about half of our energy in North America right off the top. It's just uselessly put away through windows like the one right behind us. So a 50% reduction could occur without any change whatsoever in the material standard of life that we enjoy. But this requires enormous changes to our building practices and building codes, as well as a much deeper understanding on the part of individual citizens as to what their role is in supporting the kinds of things that we're trying to do here. And also a very close look at our personal consumption habits. If your neighborhood designs are still assuming private transportation in 2,000 kilogram SUVs, you're not even close to the mark on dealing with what we should be talking about here. That's my last rant, Mark. So.
Okay. Thanks, Bill. Very quickly and then Gerben.
Very short. Really important, I agree with you, Bill, totally. It's not only looking for, let's say, the building or what we can build. It's really also about the habits and, let's say, one or two words to traffic. Let's say to the infrastructure we need to get rid of our cars right now. In Germany, most people would not know that. There are, for the moment, 5 big programs built on billions of euros created by the German government, which created hubs, like workshops like here, with a car industry, with a local municipality, and with one of the big electronic enterprises. And there's one hub in Wolfsburg, Volkswagen, then another one in Munich, another one, of course, Daimler Chrysler in Stuttgart. And they have the task to change the municipalities and the cities of the nearer future, we are talking within the next 10 years, to create inner cities without any kind of gas-driven cars. So we're not talking about any kind of sophisticated programs, we're talking about real technique which has to be created within the next 3 years to change our habits.
Great, so let me just make a few very quick closing comments. Virtual folks, thanks again for being with us. We just go to the next slide. So, I'm not going to do any more tech stuff because we're done now, but we are definitely going to be bringing this to the London workshop, and talking about innovating versus standardizing, globalizing versus localizing. Next. And questions that have just come up now about expectations from policy and practice, the role of research, researcher-practitioner interaction. One of the things that I really liked about this discussion today is we've had researchers and practitioners together, and also in creating this program, we've had researchers and practitioners working on this together, and I think that's an exciting and promising area. Next, please. So, how to keep the conversation going. We have these events, they take a lot of time and energy to put together, and then we lose momentum. So, a couple of things. June 12th, anybody who happens to be in London with Bill and myself, you're welcome to come to the next workshop where we're going to put this together for that project. But for the rest of us, next, there is Pando, and it's been referred to a couple of times today, and I just wanted to let you know what this is. This is an online collaboration platform precisely to keep the momentum going, to keep the conversation going around topics like this. So thanks very much.
Thank you on behalf of all